I should have noticed the math before the message. Logic is a cold safety net, and usually mine is woven tight. As a systems analyst, I spend my days looking for the friction in the data, the places where the numbers stutter or the flow of information hitches. People think in stories, but the world runs on sequences. If you change the sequence, you change the outcome. I understood that, or I thought I did, until my phone vibrated against the nightstand at 2:14 a.m. The screen was a harsh rectangular glare in the dark of my bedroom. The message was from Karen. It was long, a wall of text that vibrated with a frantic, breathless energy. Lucas, I didn't want to tell you. I thought I could handle it. But the tests came back. It's him, it's the boy. We're at the clinic now and they're talking about specialized treatments, things insurance won't even look at. They need a deposit, they need a commitment, $100,000 just to start the protocol. Please, Lucas, you're the only one who has ever really looked out for us. I sat up, the sheets pooling around my waist. The air in the room felt suddenly thin, as if the oxygen had been sucked out by the sheer weight of those sentences. My nephew. He was 7, a quiet kid who liked drawing circles and lived in the periphery of my life because Karen made access a chore. I felt a tightening in my chest, a physical constriction that felt like a wire being pulled taut. It wasn't a panic attack, it was the sound of a system failing. I read the message again, then a third time. I am a man of sequences. I look for patterns. Even in that moment of manufactured crisis, a small, quiet part of my brain, the part that audits bank ledgers and maps server hierarchies, noted a strange absence of detail. There was no mention of the specific facility. There was no mention of the specific diagnosis. And most tellingly, Karen had not used his name once. She referred to him as him or the boy. It was as if she were distancing herself from the subject of her own tragedy. But emotion is a powerful solvent. It dissolves logic if you let it sit long enough. I thought of my nephew's face, the way he looked when he was concentrating on a drawing, and I let the solvent do its work. I didn't reply. I didn't ask for the name of the doctor or the address of the clinic. I didn't want to be the brother who interrogated a grieving mother. I wanted to be the hero. We all want to be the hero in a story we haven't finished reading yet. I got out of bed, my feet hitting the cold hardwood floor. I walked to my office, the small second bedroom where I spent 14 hours a day staring at grids and code. I didn't turn on the overhead light. The glow from my 3 monitors provided enough illumination to see the icons on my desktop. I logged into my primary brokerage account, $100,000. It represented 5 years of disciplined living. It was the surplus of a life spent saying no to vacations, no to a better car, and no to anything that didn't serve the long-term stability of my future. It was my armor. I initiated the wire transfer to Karen's business account, the one she used for her online resale shop. It was the only account I had on file for her. My fingers moved across the keys with a practiced mechanical efficiency. Click, confirm, authenticate. The digital ledger shifted. The numbers on my screen decreased, vanishing into the ether to reappear in hers. I sent a short reply. The money is sent. It should hit your account within the hour. Tell me what else you need. Give him a hug for me. She didn't reply for 6 hours. When she finally did, it was a single sentence. You saved his life, Lucas. For the next 2 weeks, I lived in a state of suspended animation. I worked my contracts, I ate my meals, and I waited for updates. They were sparse. Karen would send grainy photos of waiting rooms, generic beige chairs, stacks of old magazines, a blurred hallway. She sent texts about the new specialist and the grueling schedule, but she remained vague. Whenever I asked to come visit, there was always an excuse. He was too tired. The facility had strict guest protocols. They were traveling to a satellite office in another city. I started to feel the friction again. It was a subtle grinding in the back of my mind, the way a gear feels when a single tooth is chipped. I was sitting at my desk on a Tuesday afternoon, auditing a logistics firm's inventory database, when I noticed a discrepancy in a different set of numbers. It wasn't my work. It was my own internal ledger of Karen's behavior. She had posted a photo on her shop's social media page. It was a picture of a vintage designer handbag, a rare find that she was listing for a premium price. The caption was bubbly, full of exclamation points and sales jargon. It didn't sound like a woman who was spending her nights in a clinic. It sounded like a woman who was having a very good month. I looked at the date of the post. It was from 2 days ago. According to her last text to me, she had been in a city 300 miles away at a consultation. I opened a private tab and began to look at her shop's recent activity. She was moving a lot of inventory, high-end items, electronics, luxury goods, things that required significant capital to acquire before they could be flipped for a profit. I began to map the timeline of her acquisitions. The volume of her listings had tripled exactly 48 hours after I wired the $100,000. I felt a coldness settle over me. It wasn't the coldness of fear, but the coldness of a machine being calibrated. I went back to the first message. I should have noticed the math. I began to dig. I am a systems analyst. I have tools that the average person doesn't even know exist. I looked at the metadata of the clinic photos she had sent me. They weren't taken at a specialized medical facility. One was a lobby of a corporate law firm in the downtown district. Another was a photo of a waiting room at a high-end day spa, cropped so the logo on the wall was just out of frame. The graininess wasn't a result of a bad camera, it was a filter applied to hide the details. The wire pulled tighter, but this time it wasn't around my chest. It was around my focus. I called Evan Holt. Evan had been my best friend since high school, or at least he occupied that space by default. He managed operations at a large car dealership on the edge of the city. He was the kind of man who knew everyone's business because he made it his business to know. He owed me 3 years of free data management for his inventory systems, favors I had never called in. "Lucas," Evan said, his voice booming with a false heartiness that always grated on me. "Long time. You finally calling about that trade-in?" "I need a favor, Evan, a real one." "Anything for the man who saved my payroll database. Name it." "My sister, Karen. She's been in contact with you lately?" There was a pause. A beat too long, the friction again. "Karen?" "Yeah, she stopped by the lot last week, looking at a SUV. Why? Everything okay?" "Did she buy it?" She's in negotiations. Why do you care about her car, Lucas? I thought you guys were tight." "We are," I said, my voice as flat as a dial tone. "I'm just helping her with some financial planning. Did she mention the boy, my nephew?" "The kid? No. Why would she? She seemed great, energetic, said business was finally booming. She mentioned you, actually. Said you'd been a huge help getting her business back on its feet." "I bet she did. Hey, Lucas, you still there?" "I'm here, Evan. Thanks for the info. I'll talk to you soon." I hung up. I sat in the silence of my office. The only sound the hum of the cooling fans in my computer towers. The math was now perfectly clear. $100,000 hadn't gone to a clinic. It hadn't gone to a specialized protocol. It had gone into a resale business, a new SUV, and a lifestyle that Karen felt she deserved. She had used the child as a prop. She had used my fear as a lever. She had calculated exactly how much my guilt and my love were worth, and she had cashed them out. I looked at the screens in front of me. For years, I had used my skills to make other people's systems run more efficiently. I had optimized their profits, secured their data, and streamlined their lives. I had been the silent architect of their success. I realized then that if you can build a system, you can also dismantle one. I didn't feel rage. Rage is messy. Rage is a leak in the pressurized line. What I felt was a profound sense of clarity. Karen thought she was playing a game of emotional checkers, but she had invited a grandmaster to the table without checking his ranking. She didn't know that I had been keeping records of everything. Every loan I'd co-signed for Matthew, every favor I'd done for Evan, every utility bill I'd quietly covered for her over the last decade. I reached out and touched the edge of my monitor. The screen was warm. I began to open new windows. I didn't start with a confrontation. I didn't send an angry text. I didn't demand my money back. That would be the reaction of a victim. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was an auditor, and the audit had just begun. I started by pulling Karen's business registration filings. I looked at the tax ID, the linked accounts, and the names of her primary suppliers. I looked at the digital trail she had left behind, the sloppy, arrogant trail of someone who thinks they are too clever to be caught. Then I looked at the clock. It was nearly dinner time. I imagined Karen sitting in her house, perhaps looking at her new SUV in the driveway, or browsing more inventory to buy with my money. She would be feeling a sense of triumph. She would think she had finally outmaneuvered her boring older brother. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long, slow breath. The wire was no longer around me. I was the one holding it now. I began to type, my fingers flying across the keys with a new, lethal purpose. The sequence had changed. The outcome was now inevitable. The morning air was crisp, the kind of Midwestern chill that settles into the pavement and stays there until noon. I sat in my car across the street from the St. Jude Pediatric Wellness Center. Not the National Hospital, but a local affiliate clinic Karen had mentioned in passing during one of her more harrowing updates. I watched the automatic glass doors slide open and shut. A woman pushed a stroller. An elderly man leaned on a walker. No Karen, no nephew. I checked my watch. 8:14 a.m. According to the text she sent me yesterday, they were supposed to be here for a critical transfusion. I had memorized the terminology she used. She was getting better at it, weaving in medical jargon she must have pulled from a cursory search engine deep dive. I stepped out of the car. My movements were deliberate. I wore a charcoal overcoat and carried a leather portfolio. I looked like a man with an appointment, a man who belonged in a room where decisions were made. I walked through the sliding doors and felt the immediate shift in atmosphere, the smell of industrial floor cleaner and the low hum of a climate control system struggling against the morning frost. The receptionist was a woman in her late 50s with glasses perched on the tip of her nose. She didn't look up until I was standing directly in front of the desk. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice practiced and neutral. "I hope so," I said, leaning slightly against the counter. I didn't smile. Smiles can be seen as a request for a favor, and I wasn't there to ask for favors. "I'm Lucas Bennett. My sister Karen Bennett was supposed to bring her son in this morning for a scheduled procedure. I was supposed to meet them, but I think I've missed them. I just want to make sure I'm in the right wing." The woman tapped at her keyboard. The click-clack of the keys was the only sound in the lobby. I watched her eyes move across the screen. I knew the interface she was looking at. It was a standard medical scheduling platform, outdated and prone to lag. "Bennett?" she asked, frowning. "I don't see a Bennett on the schedule for today, not for any of the infusion rooms." "That's strange," I said, my voice remaining perfectly level. "Perhaps it was under her husband's name, Matthew Cole?" She typed again. The frown deepened. No Cole either. In fact, I don't see any record of a patient by that name in our system for the last 6 months. Are you sure you have the right clinic? There's a general hospital 4 miles east." "I'm sure," I said, "but thank you. I must have misheard her. It's been a stressful time." I walked away before she could offer any more assistance. I didn't need any more. The absence of a name is as much a data point as the presence of one. In a system built on records, a missing entry is a loud, ringing alarm. I returned to my car but didn't start the engine. Instead, I pulled up a social media feed on my phone. I didn't look at Karen's profile. She had blocked me from seeing her stories days ago, a move she thought was subtle. I looked at the profile of Sarah Jenkins, a woman Karen considered her best friend and a woman who couldn't resist documenting every moment of her life for her 400 followers. Sarah had posted a photo 2 hours ago. It was a shot of a poolside brunch. The sun was bright, reflecting off the blue water of a hotel pool. In the corner of the frame, partially obscured by a large tropical drink, was a woman's hand. The nails were painted a very specific shade of electric lilac. I went back to the photos Karen had sent me of the clinic last week. In one of them, her hand was visible as she held a plastic cup of water. Electric lilac. The hotel in Sarah's photo had a distinctive logo on the cloth napkins, the Grand Meridian. It was a 3-hour drive from here, a luxury resort known for its spa and its strict no-children policy in the main pool area. I started the car. I didn't feel the urge to scream. I didn't feel the need to grip the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I simply put the car in gear and drove. I had work to do, and the first step of any audit is the physical verification of assets. I arrived at a storage facility on the outskirts of the city around noon. It was a sprawling complex of corrugated metal buildings surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with coils of wire. Karen kept a unit here for her inventory. She had asked me to pay the rent on it 6 months ago when her business was struggling. I still had the gate code and the spare key. She had likely forgotten that, or she assumed I was too polite to ever use it. The gate hummed open. I drove to Unit 412. The padlock was new, but the latch was old. I used a heavy-duty bolt cutter I had picked up at a hardware store on the way. The snap of the metal was clean and satisfying. I rolled up the heavy door. The unit was packed. This wasn't the haphazard collection of a struggling reseller. This was a sophisticated distribution hub. Shelves were lined with high-end electronics, still in their original shrink wrap. Crates of designer shoes were stacked 4 high. In the center of the room sat a brand-new, high-speed industrial label printer and a workstation with a high-end laptop. I stepped inside and began to take photos. I moved methodically, documenting the serial numbers, the shipping manifests, and the invoices pinned to a corkboard. I found a folder labeled Acquisitions. Inside were receipts for luxury items totaling over $60,000, all dated within the last 10 days. The math was beautiful in its ugliness. She hadn't just taken the money, she had laundered it into physical assets, turning my liquid savings into a retail empire. I found a stack of mail in a corner, mostly invoices and late notices for her personal accounts. Among them was a bank statement for her business account. I flipped to the last page. The balance was healthy, but there were several large transfers out to an account I didn't recognize. I photographed the account numbers. As I was leaving, my phone buzzed. It was a call from Karen. I let it ring for 3 cycles before I answered. "Hello, Karen." Lucas. Her voice was thick with forced emotion, a trembling vibrato that she used when she wanted something. I'm so sorry I haven't checked in. It's been a nightmare. The doctors, they're saying he needs another round of the medication. The first one didn't take like they hoped. I'm sitting here in the hallway I don't know what to do. I looked at the industrial label printer in front of me. I looked at the electric lilac nail polish on the invoices I had just photographed. Where are you, Karen? I'm at the clinic, Lucas. Where else would I be? It's so loud here. The machines are constant. I haven't slept in 36 hours. In the background of the call, I heard a faint, rhythmic sound. It wasn't the beep of a medical monitor. It was the distinct, muffled thump of upbeat electronic dance music and the splash of water. You sound tired, I said. You should probably go get some sun. It's a beautiful day. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. What? What is that supposed to mean? Nothing, I said. I'm just finishing up some work. I'll let you get back to whatever it is you're doing. Lucas, wait. The doctors said... I ended the call. I didn't need to hear the rest of the script. The script was irrelevant because the data had already been verified. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a quiet corner of a public library using their high-speed connection to run a deep tissue search on Matthew Cole. If Karen was the face of the operation, Matthew was the structural support. I found his recent real estate filings. He was flipping a property in the Heights, a neighborhood where the entry price was well above his known credit limit. I dug into the financing. He had used a bridge loan. The collateral for the loan was a series of personal guarantees. I recognized the formatting of the documents. I recognized the digital signature. He had forged my electronic signature as a secondary guarantor. It was a clumsy job, a copy-paste of a signature from a family holiday card I'd sent 3 years ago. But in the eyes of an automated lending system, it was enough to trigger the release of funds. He had leveraged my credit score, my 10-year history of perfect payments, to secure a $500,000 property. They weren't just stealing my present, they were cannibalizing my future. I felt a strange sense of gratitude. By being so thorough in their betrayal, they had removed any lingering traces of hesitation. They had simplified the equation. In a system where everyone is acting in good faith, the analyst's job is to maintain the status quo. In a system where the actors are corrupt, the analyst's job is to initiate a total reset. I drove back to my apartment as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the highway. I didn't go inside. I sat in my car and opened my laptop. I accessed my own credit monitoring service and placed an immediate freeze on all my accounts. Then, I sent a formal inquiry to the lending institution Matthew had used, flagging the signature on the bridge loan as unauthorized. I wasn't calling the police. Not yet. The police are a blunt instrument, and their involvement often leads to a loss of control. I wanted the control. I wanted to be the one who decided when the floor gave way. I sent one more message before I went upstairs. It was to Evan Holt. Evan, I need the VINs for the vehicles Karen was looking at. All of them. And I need to know which ones she put a deposit on. I'll be by the lot tomorrow morning. Don't tell her I asked. He replied almost instantly. Sure thing, Lucas. Whatever you need. Is everything okay? You seem intense. I didn't reply. I went into my apartment and made a cup of coffee. I sat in the dark and watched the lights of the city. I thought about the $100,000. It was gone, likely spent, or moved into accounts I couldn't easily seize. But money is just a representation of value. There are other ways to extract value from a person. I thought about the look on Karen's face when the system she had built started to return error codes. I thought about Matthew's property deal, held together by a forged signature that was now being scrutinized by a fraud department. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. The audit was moving into the discovery phase, and I was going to make sure every single line item was accounted for. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from Karen. I'm sorry if I sounded short on the phone. It's just so hard. Thank you for being the only one who cares. We love you so much. I deleted the message. I didn't need her words. I had her data, and by the time I was finished, that was the only thing that would remain of her. The architecture of a car dealership is designed to manufacture a sense of inevitability. The high ceilings, the floor-to-ceiling glass, and the scent of new leather are all calibrated to make a buyer feel like they are ascending to a higher version of themselves. As I pulled into the lot of Holt Motors the next morning, I saw the system for what it was, a fragile glass box held together by credit and desperation. Evan Holt was standing near the entrance, leaning against a silver sedan with the practiced ease of a man who spent his life selling things he didn't own. He waved as I approached, his smile wide and white, but his eyes were darting toward my car, looking for a crack in my composure. Lucas, you're early. I've got those VINs you wanted, though I have to say, this is some thorough financial planning you're doing for your sister. Precision is the only way to ensure stability, Evan, I said. I didn't shake his hand. I just looked at the folder he was holding. We walked into his office, a small space tucked behind a partition of frosted glass. On his desk sat a photo of his family and a trophy for regional sales. I sat down and opened the folder. The documents confirmed what my research had suggested. Karen hadn't just looked at an SUV, she had signed a lease agreement for a top-of-the-line model using a portion of the funds I had sent as a massive down payment to lower the monthly installments. But there was more. The paperwork listed her business as the primary leaseholder, and the secondary contact was Matthew Cole. She used your name as a professional reference, Lucas, Evan said, his voice dropping an octave into a confidential murmur. She said you were backing her new expansion. That's why the finance office cleared it so fast. Your credit is a gold standard in this city. If you're in, they're in. I see, I said. I looked at the signature line. It wasn't forged this time. She had simply checked a box stating that I had verbally authorized the use of my name as a guarantor of her business liquidity. It was a soft lie, the kind that relies on the laziness of a mid-tier loan officer. I looked at Evan. He was tapping a pen against his desk, a rhythmic sound that betrayed his nerves. He knew Karen didn't have the money. He knew her business was a house of cards. But he wanted the commission, and he wanted the favor he could hold over me later. Evan, I'm running an audit on her business accounts as part of a restructuring, I said, keeping my voice conversational. I've noticed some overlap with your inventory. It looks like she's been sourcing certain high-end parts and accessories through your wholesale channel. Evan's tapping stopped. He shifted in his chair. We do some business, yeah. It's all standard stuff. She finds the buyers. I provide the stock at a volume discount. It's a win-win. Is it? I pulled a single sheet of paper from my portfolio. It was a printout of the dealership's compliance report, one I had helped him automate 2 years ago. I had highlighted several discrepancies where inventory was listed as damaged in transit, but had miraculously appeared on Karen's resale site 3 days later. Because from a regulatory standpoint, it looks like you're offloading taxable assets into a private resale loop to avoid reporting the gains. That's a serious breach of your franchise agreement, Evan. The color drained from his face. The white smile version of Evan vanished, replaced by a man who realized he was sitting across from a predator he had mistaken for a friend. Lucas, wait. It's not like that. Karen said you were okay with it. She said it was part of the plan to grow the family fund. Karen says a lot of things, I replied, but the data doesn't speak. It just exists. And right now, the data says you're complicit in a fraud scheme. I was just trying to help her out, Evan hissed, leaning across the desk. She told me the kid was sick. She said you were the one who suggested the resale loop to cover the medical costs. I felt a surge of cold clarity. She had used my nephew as a shield for Evan, too. She had weaponized a child's health to turn my best friend into an accomplice. I stood up slowly and looked down at him. I'm going to give you a choice, Evan. I can file a formal audit report with the dealership's board this afternoon, or you can give me the full access logs for every transaction Karen has made here in the last 12 months. Every invoice, every bank transfer, every damaged item, and you're going to give me the keys to the SUV she's picking up today. I can't just give you the car, Lucas. That's a breach of... I'm the guarantor, Evan, I interrupted. According to the fine print on the document you just showed me, I have the right to secure the asset if there's a risk of default, and I am officially declaring a risk of default. 5 minutes later, I walked out of the office with a digital thumb drive and a set of keys. I walked toward the silver SUV parked in the delivery bay. It was a beautiful machine, pristine and powerful. It was the physical manifestation of the money I had earned through years of labor, money that was supposed to be saving a life. I got inside. The interior still had that chemical sweetness of a new vehicle. I started the engine. It purred with a quiet, expensive confidence. I drove it out of the lot, but I didn't go home. I drove to the property Matthew was flipping in the Heights. The house was a sprawling Victorian, currently obscured by scaffolding and plastic sheeting. It was a project that required a massive amount of capital Matthew didn't have. I parked the SUV at the curb and walked toward the construction site. Matthew was there, talking to a contractor. He saw me, and his expression shifted from professional annoyance to a strange, guarded joviality. He was a large man, prone to expensive suits and loud laughter, the kind of person who occupies as much space as possible to hide the fact that he is hollow. Lucas, what are you doing in this neck of the woods? Come to see the investment? He clapped a hand on my shoulder. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I came to see the collateral, I said. Matthew laughed, though it sounded a bit thin. Always the analyst. Look, I know the bridge loan was a bit of a stretch, but once we move this place, we're looking at a 30% margin. I'll have your name off the paperwork by next month. Karen said you were fine with the short-term use of the credit line. Karen isn't the one who owns my credit, Matthew. You are currently standing in a house that was purchased with a forged signature. That makes this a crime scene, not an investment. The contractor glanced at us and took a few steps back, sensing the change in the air. Matthew's face hardened. He dropped his hand from my shoulder. Don't be dramatic, Lucas. We're family. Family helps each other. You have more than enough to go around, and we're actually doing something with it instead of letting it sit in a digital vault. The something you're doing is collapsing, I said. I pulled out my phone and showed him a notification from the lending institution. I've already flagged the loan. The funds for your contractors will be frozen by the end of the business day. The materials on site will be seized as part of the recovery process. Matthew stepped closer, his shadow falling over me. He was taller than me, heavier, and he used his physicality as a silent threat. You think you're so smart with your spreadsheets and your logic. But out here, in the real world, things are built with sweat and connections. You pull those funds, and I'll make sure everyone knows you're the one who ruined your sister's chance at a future. I'll tell her you're the reason her business failed. I'll tell her you're the reason we couldn't afford the treatments. You'll tell her whatever you want, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to carry more weight than his shouting. But you won't tell her from this house, because by sunset I'll have a lien on this property that will make it impossible for you to even paint a wall without my permission. I turned and walked back to the SUV. Behind me, Matthew started yelling, a string of incoherent frustrations that bounced off the scaffolding. I didn't look back. I got into the car and drove away, the silence of the cabin a sharp contrast to the chaos I had just ignited. I felt a strange sensation in my chest, not the constriction of fear, but a rhythmic, steady pulse of satisfaction. The system was responding. The friction I had introduced was causing the gears to grind, and soon they would cease entirely. I spent the afternoon at a local coffee shop, using their Wi-Fi to execute the next phase of the plan. I logged into the admin portal of Karen's resale platform. I had built the backend for her 3 years ago as a birthday present, and she had never bothered to change the master administrative credentials. I didn't delete her account. That would be too quick. Instead, I began to adjust the settings. I increased the shipping lead times to 30 days. I changed the refund policy to automatic approval for any customer complaint. I flagged her entire inventory for compliance review, which would prevent any new sales from being finalized. I watched as the system updated. It was a quiet destruction, a series of digital toggles that would effectively shut down her business within 48 hours. As I worked, I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was a message from Karen. It was a photo of my nephew. He was sitting on a couch, looking at a book. He looked perfectly healthy. He looked exactly like a boy who had no idea he was being used as a pawn in a high-stakes fraud. The caption read, "He's having a good day today. Thank you for making this possible, Lucas. We don't know what we'd do without you." I looked at the photo for a long time. I looked at his eyes, so much like mine, and I felt a momentary flicker of something that might have been regret. But then I looked at the background of the photo. Behind the couch, on a marble countertop, sat a shopping bag from a high-end boutique in the hotel where Karen was supposed to be grieving. The flicker vanished. I closed the laptop and finished my coffee. The favor network was dismantled. The credit was frozen. The inventory was locked. I had spent my life building things for people who didn't appreciate the effort it took to keep them standing. Now I was going to enjoy the view as those same things crumbled under the weight of their own lies. I got back into the silver SUV, my SUV, and drove toward the storage unit. I had one more delivery to make before the day was over, and it was the most important one yet. I was going to show Karen exactly what happens when the math finally stops adding up. The luxury of a quiet life is that you never have to see the foundations of your world until someone starts digging them up. For Karen and Matthew, I had been the foundation, unseen, silent, and structurally sound. I had provided the stability they used to build their house of mirrors. But as I drove toward Karen's neighborhood, I felt a clinical detachment from the ruin I was about to facilitate. I was no longer the architect. I was the demolition specialist, and the charges had already been set. I stopped at a nondescript office park on the way to her house. This was the headquarters of the utility aggregator I use for all my properties. Because I had managed the family's logistics for years, I held the master accounts for the water, electricity, and high-speed data for 3 different households: mine, Karen's, and the rental property Matthew used as his primary office. It was a convenience I had offered during a better time, a way to ensure that the family never had to worry about a missed payment or a service interruption. I sat in the parking lot and accessed the management portal on my tablet. With a few precise keystrokes, I initiated a voluntary suspension of services for both addresses, effective immediately. I cited long-term maintenance and structural vacancy. The system didn't ask for proof of hardship, it simply accepted the command from the authorized account holder. In a world governed by digital permissions, power isn't about who has the most money, it's about who holds the administrative keys. By the time I reached Karen Street, her house would be beginning to cool. The hum of the refrigerator would have ceased. The Wi-Fi routers, the lifeblood of her fraudulent resale empire, would be dark. I parked the silver SUV 2 houses down. It was a statement in itself, a $100,000 piece of machinery that she believed was hers, now sitting just out of reach. I walked toward her front door. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where people pay for the illusion of safety. Manicured lawns, silent driveways, and the distant sound of a leaf blower. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. Karen was already at the door, her face a mask of frantic confusion. She was holding her phone up to the sky, as if she could catch a signal out of the air. When she saw me, her expression shifted into a jagged relief. "Lucas, thank God. Everything just went out. The power, the water. I can't even get a bars on my phone. I think the whole block is down. I was trying to call the clinic to check on the boys' results, and... Wait, whose car is that?" She looked past me at the silver SUV. Her eyes widened, the lilac polish on her fingernails catching the afternoon light as she pointed. "Is that it? Is that the one Evan was prepping for me?" "It's a beautiful vehicle, Karen," I said, stepping into the foyer. The house was already starting to feel stale without the constant circulation of the air conditioning. "But it isn't yours. It's mine. I took delivery this morning." She blinked, her mouth hanging open for a fraction of a second before she forced a laugh. "What are you talking about? We discussed this. The business needs a transport vehicle for the high-end inventory. It's a tax write-off, remember? You said you'd guarantee the lease." "I did guarantee it," I said, walking into her living room. I noticed the small details now, the new silk throw pillows, the expensive espresso machine on the counter, the sheer volume of luxury brand shopping bags tucked behind the sofa. And as the guarantor, I decided the risk was too high, so I secured the asset. "Risk?" Her voice climbed an octave. "What risk?" "Lucas, I don't have time for your weird logic games right now. My son is sick. I have a business to run. I have $3,000 worth of inventory that needs to be logged today, and I can't even turn on a light." "You don't have a business anymore, Karen? I've flagged your seller account for a compliance audit. Every transaction you've made in the last 90 days is being reviewed for provenance. The platform has already frozen your payouts." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a person realizing that the floor they were standing on was actually a trap door. Karen's face went pale, the artificial tan looking yellow under the natural light streaming through the windows. You did what?" she whispered. "I looked at the math," I said. I sat down in one of her new armchairs. It was incredibly comfortable. "The math of the clinic that doesn't have your son on the schedule. The math of the spa hotel in the background of your photos. The math of the damaged inventory Evan was feeding you. It all adds up to the same thing. You didn't need $100,000 for a treatment. You needed it for a lifestyle." Karen didn't cry. She didn't have the integrity for a genuine emotional collapse. Instead, her face twisted into a snarl of pure, focused resentment. "You always were a cold, arrogant person, Lucas. You think because you have the bank account, you get to play God with our lives? I needed that money. We were drowning. Matthew's deals were stalling, and I had a chance to actually make something of myself. You wouldn't understand. You just sit in your little room and count your numbers while the rest of us actually live." "You lived on my labor," I said. "You used my nephew as a prop for a fraud. That's where the conversation ends." "He is my son," she screamed. "You can't take that away. I'll tell everyone what you've done. I'll tell the family you cut off my power while he was resting. I'll make sure you're the monster in this story." "I've already spoken to the family, Karen. I sent a copy of the clinic's non-patient report to Aunt Martha and the cousins an hour ago. I included the receipts from your inventory acquisitions. I think you'll find that the story has already been told." She lunged toward me, not to strike, but to grab the portfolio I was holding. I stood up and stepped back with a fluid ease. She stumbled, her lilac nails scratching against the wood of the coffee table. At that moment, she was supposed to be hosting one of her VIP live sales. Her phone, which she had propped up on a tripod in the corner, suddenly chimed with a notification. Even without Wi-Fi, a stray cellular signal had pushed through a final alert. "What is that?" I asked, though I already knew. She scrambled for the phone. Her face fell as she read the screen. I had set a timed broadcast for her business page. While she was standing here in the dark, Every one of her loyal customers was receiving a notification that her shop was under investigation for the sale of stolen and misrepresented goods. "You're ruining me," she breathed, in front of everyone. "I'm not ruining you," I corrected. "I'm just making the private reality public. That's what an audit is. It's the truth, laid bare." I walked toward the door. As I reached the foyer, Matthew's truck roared into the driveway. He slammed the door and burst into the house, his face a mask of sweating rage. He was still wearing his work vest, but it was stained with dust. "Bennett," he bellowed. "The bank just called. They've pulled the bridge loan. The contractors just walked off the Heights site. They took the lumber with them. What did you do?" I didn't answer him directly. I looked at Karen, then back at Matthew. "The utilities are off. The car is mine. The business is frozen. The house in the Heights is in foreclosure as of 20 minutes ago. I suggest you two start looking for a more sustainable way to live, perhaps something that doesn't involve forgery or exploitation." Matthew moved toward me, his chest puffed out, his fists clenched. "You think you're going to just walk away? You think you can destroy our lives and just drive off in that shiny toy?" "I'm not the one who destroyed your lives, Matthew. I'm just the one who stopped paying for the repairs. There's a difference." I stepped out onto the porch. The sun was beginning to set, casting a long, golden glow over the suburban street. It looked peaceful. It looked like a place where nothing was wrong. "I'll see you in court," Matthew yelled from the doorway. "I look forward to it," I said. "The discovery phase is going to be very enlightening for the prosecutor." I got into the silver SUV. I adjusted the mirrors and checked the rear-view camera. I could see them standing on the porch. Two people who had spent their lives believing they were the lead characters in a play where I was just the stagehand. They looked small. They looked confused. As I pulled away, I felt a sense of completion. The middle of the story is always the most difficult part to write, the part where the pressure has to be maintained without causing a premature explosion. But I had managed it. I had cut off their resources, exposed their lies, and isolated them from their support network. I drove toward the center of the city. I had one more task before the day was over. I needed to find a place to park my new car, somewhere safe and well lit, where I could sit and plan the final confrontation. The weight of the last few weeks was finally starting to lift. I wasn't the hero of the story, and I wasn't the monster. I was just the analyst. And for the first time in my life, the numbers were finally perfectly balanced. My phone buzzed on the dashboard. It was a message from a secondary enabler, one of Karen's suppliers, who had been helping her move the damaged goods. "Lucas, I heard what happened. I don't want any trouble. I have the logs you asked for. I'll send them over tonight. Just please keep my name out of the audit." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. In a collapsing system, everyone turns on everyone else eventually. It's just another predictable sequence. The silence of a city at 4 a.m. is a specialized frequency. It is the sound of systems resetting, of automated scripts running in the background while the world sleeps, and of the quiet hummed vibration of electrical substations. I sat in my apartment, the air cooling as the pre-dawn temperature dropped, staring at the glow of my monitors. For 3 days, I had retreated. I had ignored the frantic messages from Karen, the blustering voicemails from Matthew, and the groveling emails from Evan. To them, I had vanished. To them, my silence was a sign of hesitation or perhaps a slow-thawing heart. They were wrong. In the world of systems analysis, a pause is rarely a stop. It is a buffer, a moment where data is gathered and cached before the final execution command. I had spent these 72 hours looking backward. I had accessed the old family cloud accounts, the ones Karen had forgotten I still managed. I wasn't looking for new crimes. I was looking for the origin point. I found it in a folder of archived messages from 18 months ago, long before the diagnosis, long before the emergency. There was a conversation between Karen and Matthew, a digital blueprint of everything that had transpired. They had discussed my savings as if it were a stagnant pool of water. They were doing me a favor by draining. "He doesn't spend it," Karen had written. "It's just sitting there. He wouldn't even miss it if we staged it right. He needs to feel needed, Matthew. That's his weakness. If we give him a crisis, he'll give us the keys." Reading those words didn't cause a surge of heat. Instead, it felt like the final piece of a complex puzzle clicking into place. The betrayal wasn't an opportunistic lapse in judgment. It was a premeditated architectural project. They hadn't stumbled into fraud. They had built a bridge out of my trust to reach a shore they couldn't afford. I began the final sequence. I sent a single, short message to the family group chat. The one that included our cousins, Aunt Martha, and the peripheral relatives who had spent the last week buzzing with the rumors I had planted. "I'm sorry for the silence. It's been a lot to process. I've arranged a meeting tomorrow at the old municipal library, the one on 4th Street. 10:12 a.m. in the private study wing. I have the final documents ready for everyone to sign so we can put this behind us. Karen, Matthew, Evan, please be there. I'm ready to settle this. The replies were instantaneous. Thank you, Lucas, Karen wrote, her digital tone pivoting back to its manipulative sweetness. I knew you'd come around. We just want things back to normal. See you there, buddy, Evan chimed in, likely relieved that his dealership wouldn't be audited into oblivion. I closed the laptop. The bait was set. They believed I was retreating to the comfort of family, that I was willing to trade my $100,000 for a return to the status quo. They thought they had successfully navigated the friction and emerged on the other side. I left my apartment at 9:00 a.m. the following morning. I didn't take the silver SUV, I took a taxi. I wanted to arrive without a footprint. But I didn't go to the library, not yet. I had one more physical verification to perform. I directed the driver to a small commercial lot near the industrial district. This was where Karen's primary delivery van was kept, the vehicle she used to transport the high-end inventory she had been flipping. It was a white, unmarked van, registered to a shell company she thought I couldn't trace. But every shell has a crack, and I had found hers through a recurring insurance payment on her business ledger. The van was there, parked behind a rusted gate. I saw Karen standing next to it. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be preparing for our meeting. But she was frantic, throwing boxes into the back of the van with a desperate, jerky energy. She was liquidated. She was trying to move the physical assets before the settlement could freeze them. I told the taxi driver to wait and stepped out into the cold morning air. Karen didn't see me until I was 10 feet away. When she looked up, her face didn't hold the sweetness of her text message. It was jagged with a feral sort of panic. Lucas, what are you doing here? The meeting isn't for another hour. I decided to perform a site visit, I said. I looked at the boxes. They were filled with the luxury electronics and designer goods I had flagged in her storage unit. You're moving inventory, Karen. That seems counterintuitive for someone who wants to reach a settlement. I'm securing it, she snapped, slamming the back door of the van. The sound echoed off the metal buildings. I don't trust the people you've been talking to. I have to protect my livelihood. With what? Stolen goods? They aren't stolen. I bought them. With my money, I reminded her. She moved toward the driver's side door, her keys jangling in her hand. Move out of the way, Lucas. I don't have time for this. I'll see you at the library. She climbed into the seat and started the engine. It was an old, rattling thing, a sharp contrast to the luxury she had been trying to project. I didn't move. I stood directly in front of the van's path. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't threatening. I was just an obstacle in a sequence she was trying to complete. Get out of the way, she yelled through the windshield, her face distorted by the glass. I didn't move. She shifted the van into gear and let it roll forward an inch. The bumper touched my knees. I felt the cold metal pressing against my slacks. I looked her directly in the eyes. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted. She realized that I wasn't afraid of the impact. I was a man who had already lost the things he valued, and that made me the most dangerous element in her environment. She stomped on the brake, the van lurching to a halt. She threw the door open and jumped out, her face red, her voice a screech of frustration. What is wrong with you? Are you trying to get hurt? You're acting like a lunatic. I walked past her to the side of the van. I picked up a heavy, discarded metal pipe from a pile of scrap near the fence. It was cold and pitted with age. I didn't look at her. I didn't say a word. I swung the pipe with a controlled, mechanical force. The sound of the side mirror shattering was surprisingly musical. Shards of glass rained down onto the asphalt, sparkling like diamonds in the gray morning light. I didn't stop. I walked to the other side and swung again, taking out the second mirror. Stop it! Lucas, stop! Karen was screaming now, her hands over her ears. I dropped the pipe. It clattered against the ground. I looked at the van, now blinded, its ability to navigate the world safely compromised. It was a metaphor she wouldn't understand, but one that satisfied my need for symmetry. I'll see you at the library, Karen, I said quietly. Don't be late. I've invited some people who are very interested in your inventory. I walked back to the taxi. My heart rate hadn't increased. My hands weren't shaking. I felt the way a technician feels after successfully calibrating a difficult piece of machinery. The pressure was exactly where it needed to be. As the taxi pulled away, I watched her in the rearview mirror. She was slumped against the side of the blinded van, her phone to her ear, likely calling Matthew or Evan, looking for a way to fix the unfixable. She still thought this was a crisis she could manage. She still thought there was a way to win. I arrived at the library at 9:55 a.m. The building was a relic of a different era. Heavy stone, high vaulted ceilings, and a sense of institutional permanence. I walked through the quiet stacks toward the private study wing. Matthew and Evan were already there. They were sitting at a long oak table, looking like two men who had been caught in a storm and were waiting for the sun to come out. Matthew had a folder in front of him, likely filled with the forged documents he hoped I would overlook. Evan was staring at his hands, his usual bravado stripped away. "Lucas," Matthew said, his voice cautious. "Where's Karen? She called me sounding upset." "She's on her way," I said, taking a seat at the head of the table. I laid my portfolio down. Inside were the true logs, the metadata from the spa photos, the recorded conversation from the cloud archive, and the signed statements from the suppliers who had already turned on them. "Look," Evan said, leaning forward, "we're all ready to make this right. I've got the paperwork to transfer the SUV back to your name exclusively. Matthew has a repayment plan drawn up from the Heights Project profits." "The Heights Project has no profits, Evan," I said. "The foreclosure was finalized this morning. The property is no longer Matthew's to sell." Matthew's face darkened, a vein in his forehead beginning to throb. "You said we were here to settle this, Lucas. You said we were going to put this behind us." "We are," I said. The heavy doors at the end of the wing creaked open. Karen walked in. She looked disheveled, her hair windblown and her eyes red. She sat down next to Matthew, her gaze fixed on the table. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at the mirrors she had lost. "Now that we're all here," I said, opening the portfolio, "I want to show you exactly what normal looks like from now on." I didn't start with the money. I started with the timeline. I began to narrate the last 18 months of their lives, using their own words and their own data. I showed them the moments they thought were private. I showed them the math of their betrayal. The room grew very cold. It wasn't the temperature of the air, it was the temperature of the truth. As I spoke, I could see the realization dawning on them. This wasn't a settlement. This wasn't a reconciliation. This was the final audit. And in this room, in this system, I was the only one who knew how the numbers truly ended. The library wing felt like a vacuum. High above, the dust motes danced in shafts of light that seemed too bright for the atmosphere in the room. I sat at the head of the oak table, the master of a silent ceremony. To my left, Evan Holt shifted in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. Opposite him, Matthew and Karen sat shoulder to shoulder, a united front made of glass and desperation. They were waiting for me to speak, for the settlement to begin, for the moment I would hand them a reprieve and allow them to go back to their lives of curated deception. I didn't speak. I simply opened the leather portfolio and began to slide documents across the polished surface of the table. I moved with a rhythmic, mechanical precision. One for Karen, one for Matthew, one for Evan. "What is this?" Matthew asked, his voice echoing in the vaulted space. He picked up the top sheet, his eyes scanning the lines. I watched the muscles in his jaw tighten. "This isn't a settlement agreement. These are affidavits." "They are statements of fact," I said. My voice was calm, carrying the flat resonance of a recorded message. "The first set of documents details the unauthorized use of my credit for the Heights property. It includes the forensic analysis of the forged signature and the timestamped logs of the internal bank communications. The second set covers the inventory loop at Holt Motors, specifically the damaged assets that were funneled into Karen's resale business to avoid tax reporting and franchise fees." "Lucas, stop," Karen whispered. She looked smaller today, the electric lilac polish on her fingernails chipped from her earlier frantic loading of the van. "We agreed to move past this. You said you were ready to settle." "I am," I replied. "But a settlement requires an accurate valuation of the debt. And the debt isn't just the $100,000 you took for a phantom clinic. The debt is the systemic exploitation of my reputation, my labor, and my trust over the last decade. I have finally completed the audit, and I've found that the total is far higher than I originally estimated." I pulled a small digital recorder from my pocket and placed it in the center of the table. I pressed play. The sound that filled the room was Karen's voice, clear and cold, from 18 months ago. "He doesn't spend it. It's just sitting there. He needs to feel needed, Matthew. That's his weakness. If we give him a crisis, he'll give us the keys." The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy, a physical weight that seemed to press the air out of the room. Karen looked away, her gaze fixing on a distant shelf of leather-bound books. Matthew stared at the recorder as if it were a ticking device. Evan simply closed his eyes, his face pale and slick with a fine sheen of perspiration. "I didn't just find the recordings," I continued, my tone never wavering. "I found the intent. You didn't fall into a bad situation. You designed one. You looked at my life, the discipline I've maintained, the resources I've built, and you decided it was an untapped asset for your own expansion. You saw my care as a vulnerability to be harvested. So what now?" Matthew spat, the pretense of joviality finally shattering. He leaned across the table, his large frame casting a shadow over the documents. You've got your little recordings, you've got your papers. You think that makes you the winner? You've already lost the money, Lucas. It's gone. It's in the inventory, it's in the property, it's in the accounts you can't touch. You can't get it back. I don't want it back, I said. The statement seemed to confuse them more than the evidence had. They looked at each other, searching for the catch. In their world, everything was a transaction. They couldn't conceive of a move that wasn't motivated by a desire for a return on investment. If you don't want the money, then why are we here? Evan asked, his voice trembling. Why do all of this? Because a system cannot function when the logic is corrupted, I said. I spent my life trying to keep your lives running. I balanced your books, I fixed your errors, and I provided the security you use to ignore the consequences of your choices. By doing that, I became part of the corruption. I was the enabler that allowed the friction to grow. Today, I am removing that support. I am letting the friction take its natural course. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out 3 final envelopes. I didn't slide them. I placed them firmly in front of each person. Inside those envelopes are the notices of filing, I said. For Matthew. The formal report to the State Licensing Board regarding the forgery on the bridge loan. For Evan, the compliance audit results sent to the corporate headquarters of Holt Motors, including the internal inventory logs. And for Karen, the documentation of the charity fraud and the resale of misrepresented goods sent to the platform's legal department and the local Consumer Protection Bureau. Karen lunged for her envelope, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. You can't do this. You'll ruin everything. My business, our home, the kid Lucas. Think about the boy. I am thinking about him, I said, and for the first time a trace of ice entered my voice. He deserves to grow up in a world where people are held accountable for their actions. He deserves to know that his mother didn't use his life as a bargaining chip for a luxury SUV. You monster, Karen hissed, tears of frustration finally spilling over. You're a cold, soulless monster. I am an analyst, Karen. I simply report the findings. The consequences were created by you. Matthew stood up so suddenly his chair flipped backward, the heavy wood thudding against the carpeted floor. He looked like he wanted to reach across the table and take me by the throat, but something in my expression stopped him. I didn't look like a victim. I didn't look like a man who was afraid of a confrontation. I looked like a person who had already calculated the outcome of any move he could possibly make. We'll fight this, Matthew growled. We'll say you're unstable. We'll say you're obsessed. No one is going to believe a guy who spends his life staring at screens over his own family. The beauty of data, Matthew, is that it doesn't require belief. It only requires verification. The banks, the dealership, and the platforms have already started their own internal reviews based on the evidence A provided 48 hours ago. These envelopes aren't a threat of what I might do, they are a notification of what has already been done. The realization hit them then, the final crushing weight of the sequence. I hadn't waited for this meeting to act. The meeting was merely the announcement of the result. The system had already been reset. The gears had already seized. Evan was the first to break. He stood up slowly, his movement sluggish and defeated. He didn't look at Matthew or Karen. He didn't even look at me. He just turned and walked toward the exit of the wing, his footsteps heavy and hollow. He knew his career was over. He knew the favor network was gone. Matthew looked at Karen, and for a moment, I saw the rot at the center of their marriage. Without my money to grease the wheels, without the shared goal of exploiting my resources, they were just 2 people who didn't particularly like each other, trapped in a house that was no longer theirs. The resentment was already beginning to surface, a jagged edge between them that would only grow sharper in the coming months of legal battles and financial ruin. Get out, Karen whispered, her head in her hands. Just get out, Lucas. I was just leaving, I said. I stood up and gathered my things. I closed the portfolio. The leather was smooth and cool under my touch. I felt a profound sense of lightness, as if a physical burden had been lifted from my shoulders. I had spent 37 years being the family fixer, the quiet one who made sure the math always worked in their favor. Now, the math only worked for me. I walked toward the heavy double doors. I didn't look back at the table. I didn't need to see the fallout. I knew exactly how it would play out. The loss of the car, the loss of the property, the loss of the reputation. It would be slow, methodical, and entirely legal. No one would go to prison, but they would live in the prison of their own making, a life defined by the debts they could never repay and the trust they could never earn back. I pushed open the doors and stepped into the main hall of the library. The air was warmer here, filled with the scent of old paper and the quiet murmur of people reading. It felt like a different world, a world where logic and order were respected. I walked out of the building and onto the street. The sun was high in the sky, bright and unapologetic. I pulled my phone from my pocket. There were 16 missed calls from Karen and a dozen texts from Matthew, ranging from apologies to threats. I didn't read them. I didn't delete them. I simply navigated to the settings menu, went to the account section, and initiated a factory reset. The screen went black for a moment, a small spinning icon indicating that the data was being wiped. Everything, the contacts, the messages, the history of the last decade, was being dissolved into its constituent bits and bytes. It was a total erasure of the system. When the screen flickered back to life, it was blank. It was a clean slate. I looked down the street. The silver SUV was parked at the curb, its chrome accents gleaming in the light. It was mine. The savings were gone, but the clarity I had gained was worth more than the $100,000. I had learned the true value of my own presence, and I had learned that some systems are not worth saving. I walked toward the car, my pace steady and my mind quiet. The audit was closed. The balance was zero, and for the first time in my life, I was perfectly, brilliantly alone.